Crystal of Wisdom presents How to Find Happiness and Glory.
Once upon a time, in a land shrouded in the mists of time, where fairy tales were spun like silk threads on a loom, there lived a humble woodcutter named Parkers. He was of a very stout build, and a small, fiery red beard grew on his face. His cabin stood at the edge of the forest, not far from the village. Parkers had lived in the forest all his life and knew everything about the forest, every mountain, every tree. For Parkers, the forest was like home, and Parkers also learned to be so skillful with an axe that he had no equal in the whole kingdom. His father Casimir was also a woodcutter all his life. Together with his father, Parkers used to procure firewood for the villagers. But the best order for them was to make firewood for the king's castle. They needed a lot of firewood for the royal castle, and King Shandor paid royally for this work. They took the wood to the castle in a wagon pulled by a sturdy horse. Casimir was always proud of his horse, because his horse was very strong and hardy. Parkers' mother's name was Fruzina. She was a healer and knew the useful properties of all the plants that grew in the forest and on the nearby meadows. All summer long, she gathered healing herbs, roots and berries and dried them in the summer sun. And in the fall, winter and spring, Fruzina treated the villagers. The rumor of Fruzina's miraculous abilities spread far and wide throughout the kingdom. People from all over the kingdom came to her for help. She was even invited to the royal castle. Gradually, spring passed on her knowledge to her son, Parkers. Days passed under the whispering branches of ancient trees, their leaves dancing in the golden sunlight. Despite his calloused hands and tattered clothes, Parkers' heart was overflowing with happiness. In this way, the years flew by in a quiet, serene life. Parkers grew older and more mature, but he felt that there was no place in the world better than his home and his forest. Parkers felt infinitely happy, but as the years passed, his parents grew old, and then one day, they were gone. Parkers was left all alone. Now he had to work for two. Parkers tried hard, but he couldn't make as much firewood as he used to with his father. There were fewer orders, and King Shandor had found another woodcutter for his royal castle. It was hard for Parkers. He began to live very poorly, but he was saved from illness by the knowledge of medicinal herbs that his mother Fruzina had passed on to him. One day, a carriage of a very rich man was passing along the road through the forest. The carriage was pulled by 6 fast horses. It was driven by a coachman in expensive clothes, and behind the carriage on white horses rode guards in armor. Parkers did not know whose carriage it was. What impressed Parkers the most was that the carriage was covered in dark red velvet, and the phrase "happiness and glory" was embroidered on the door in gold monograms with gold threads. The woodcutter pondered these words, and their meaning passed through his mind like a light breeze. What it meant, Parkers did not understand, but every day he remembered this carriage with a golden inscription and repeated like a spell, "Happiness and glory." For a long time, Parkers tried to understand the meaning of this inscription. He also did not understand why some people have wealth and fame. Perhaps these people must have happiness too, but why others have nothing? No wealth or happiness. That's how Parkers thought day after day, and one day he thought he'd figured out the secret. Fame, Parkers decided. I guess the difference is that these people have fame. They are known and celebrated by everyone. But I'm a glorious guy, thought Parkers. A very nice guy. Why doesn't anybody know about me? And those who did have forgotten. How can I remind them of me? But what can I do besides cut firewood? Parkers continued to ponder. Days passed and months after them, and nothing changed. Immersed in the sadness of his reflections, Parker stopped doing his work and began to live very poorly. From the realization that someone at this time lives very rich, Parker's became very sad. And one day, wandering in longing in his favorite forest, Parker's saw a wagon going along the road through the forest. It was driven by only one man. The wagon was carrying food and clothes for the royal court. Parker stepped sharply out of the forest onto the road and shouted loudly. Out of surprise, the man was greatly frightened and stopped the wagon. Parker saw this. Suddenly, something pushed Parker at that moment. He pounced on the man and threw him out of the wagon, shouting fearfully at him. The man ran off down the road in fright, without once looking back or stopping. It was then that Parker realized what had happened. There was only him and the wagon with the king's goods in the forest. Then it's all mine, Parker decided, and led the horse and the wagon far into the forest. There he ate enough, changed his tattered clothes, and fell asleep contentedly. When Parker awoke, he dragged the loot into the impenetrable thicket of the forest away from people. There he made himself a new dwelling, Forest Robber's dwelling. He built a small but sturdy house. That's what he knew how to do. And when he ran out of food, Parker attacked again, and then another and another. So unnoticeably, Parker turned into a forest robber. He knew his forest better than anyone else and could always sneak up without being noticed and disappear into the forest. In addition, because of his great strength and mastery of the axe, he had no equal in his forest. When the king's wagons stopped traveling through the forest, Parker began robbing anyone who dared to pass through the forest. In time, he grew a big red beard, and people in fear began to call him Parker's Redbeard, or Robber Redbeard. The bad news about the bandit spread throughout the kingdom. Everyone in the kingdom was afraid to even approach the forest. The bandit Parkers could wait for his prey anywhere, or he could hide in the most impenetrable thickets of the forest. Meanwhile, life in the kingdom went on. King Shandor's daughter became an adult. The name of this beautiful girl was Erzsebet. There was no girl in the kingdom more beautiful than Erzsebet, and there was no one in the neighboring kingdoms more beautiful than Erzsebet. Besides, the girl was clever beyond her years, and you might say wise beyond her years. One day, King Shandor decided to hold a knight's tournament. The winner of the tournament would meet the beautiful Erzsebet, and if the wise girl saw in the winner a worthy groom and loved him, King Shandor would immediately marry the royal daughter to a worthy knight. The heralds spread the news throughout the kingdom and all neighboring kingdoms. On the appointed day, knights from different kingdoms came to the royal castle. To Shandor's surprise, there were unexpectedly many who wanted his daughter's hand in marriage. One of the knights was Szilard. He was quite handsome. His golden curls softly covered his broad shoulders, and his blue eyes burned with an unruly fire. Despite his young age, Szilard had won more than one battle with valor. On the battlefield, he had no equal. His fame as a brave and courageous warrior flew ahead of him. His name echoed throughout the land, sounded from the lips of bards and heralds. When the knights' tournament began, of course, Szilard had no equals. He easily defeated the knights one by one. In the end, Szilard became the winner of the knights' tournament. King Shandor solemnly took the glorious knight Szilard to the beautiful Erzsebet. Szilard looked at the beautiful Erzsebet. His breath caught and his heart beat in his chest. How beautiful King Shandor's daughter was! Then Erzsebet raised her beautiful eyes and saw the glorious knight Szilard. Their gazes met. It was as if thousands of lightning bolts lit up everything around them. Erzsebet and Szilard immediately fell in love. The next day, King Shandor performed the wedding. Erzsébet and Szilárd were overjoyed. The whole kingdom rejoiced and rejoiced. For 3 days and 3 nights, the kingdom celebrated the wedding of the beautiful Erzsébet and the glorious knight Szilárd. On the 4th day, Szilárd and Erzsébet went to explore the kingdom. With joy, everyone forgot about the bandit Parkas, Redbeard, and his treacherous forest. And when the happy Szilárd and Erzsébet were traveling along the road through the forest, they were suddenly attacked by the bandit Parkas. He struck Szilárd on the head with the butt of his axe. From the blow, the knight's helmet on Szilárd's head split in half, taking the full force of the blow. The stunned Szilárd fell down unconscious. Meanwhile, Parkas grabbed the frightened Erzsébet with his strong hands and carried her deep into the forest. When Szilárd woke up, neither Parkas nor Erzsébet were there. No matter how many times Szilárd called for his bride, no matter how many times he searched for Parkas' footprints, all to no avail. Szilárd wandered through the woods till dark, but he never found poor Erzsébet. Tired and unhappy, he arrived at the king's castle and told King Shandor everything. The king's grief was unbounded.
How could I have forgotten about the brigand Parkas? Oh, woe is me, what does he want to do with my daughter?
Repeated the king. The king ordered to send a squad of warriors into the forest to search for his daughter, the beautiful Erzsébet. The king's party wandered through the forest for 7 days and 7 nights, but never found Erzsébet. After a few days, the king fell gravely ill. Szilárd vowed to search for his bride until he found her.
There is no happiness for me in life,
said Szilárd.
On the battlefield, I was a hero and defeated any enemy, but I could do nothing in a foreign forest. What glorious warrior am I now? Why should I have such glory if I have no happiness?
Every day, Szilárd went into the woods in search of Erzsébet, and every day he returned with nothing. In the meantime, the bandit Parkas brought Erzsébet to his dwelling, untied her and sat her down at the table. He had no intention of harming the beautiful Erzsébet. The girl realized this and calmed down a little. She looked around. It was a small house in the deep woods. It was obvious that the outlaw had been living there alone for a long time. In the corners were scattered things that the bandit had looted by attacking wagons in the woods. Parkas himself looked unkempt. His clothes were quite dirty. His unkempt red beard was sticking out in all directions, making his already horrible appearance even more frightening. In one corner, Parkas threw some old blankets and told the beautiful Erzsébet that here she could sleep. But the girl could not sleep. All night long it seemed to her that the terrible robber would pounce on her. But Parkas snored all night and did not even think of waking up. In the morning, Parkas set the girl a meal of wild berries and mushrooms. He said that he would go to the forest for hunting and would return only in the evening. He told her not to leave the house. It was useless to run in the forest. The bandit assured Erzsébet that if she ran away, she would only get lost, and he would find her in the forest and punish her. And in the worst case, the wolves would find her and tear her to pieces. With these words, the bandit took his axe and left. Erzsébet began to explore the brigand's dwelling. As the sun rose in the sky, timid rays of sunlight broke through the forest and lighted Parkas's dwelling. On the wall, the girl saw an inscription once scratched with a knife. This inscription read, "Happiness and fame."
What would that mean?
Erzsébet thought. But when, late in the evening, the brigand returned to his lodging, she did not dare to ask him about the inscription on the wall. Parkas was very tired and angry. He roasted a hare from the forest, shared it with Erzsébet, ate and fell asleep. It must be said that Parkas had not been talkative before, and after spending many years alone in the forest, he hardly spoke at all. Most of the time, he only uttered either approving or angry sounds. similar to the growling of a beast. This went on for several days. The brigand would go out in the morning, return in the evening, and fall asleep. Elizabeth, in order not to be bored and not to turn herself into the forest monster that Parkas seemed to be, put his house in order. She put away the scattered things, wiped away the huge layers of dust, collected the cobwebs in the corners of the house, and washed away the dirt that had accumulated over the years. But it was as if Parkas didn't notice the changes in his home. The girl kept thinking about the inscription scratched on the wall: happiness and glory. And one day she remembered that in her childhood she had seen a very rich carriage of the neighboring King Elemer come to their royal castle. The phrase happiness and glory was embroidered on the door of the carriage in gold monograms with gold threads. It is said that Elemer spent his life in glory, seeking his happiness, but died without finding either. It was a sad story. One day, when the brigand was in a good mood and had not gone anywhere from his dwelling, Elizabeth plucked up courage and asked him why the brigand needed her. Parkas thought a little and said she must be his wife.
But you are the only ruler here in the deep forest, and you could do anything.
Elizabeth wondered, to which Parkas replied that people don't do that. And then wise Elizabeth understood everything. The poor woodcutter, after the death of his parents, did not know what to do and how to live his life. The happiness that seemed eternal to him had vanished into the darkness of the forest. And then Parkas decided to find his happiness by making a name for himself. But he thought of nothing better than to become an outlaw and rob people. In this way he gained fame, but it was a bad and disgusting fame. People began to fear and hate him. But instead of happiness, Parkas found only more loneliness and oblivion. The day Parkas kidnapped Elizabeth, he decided that this was how he would finally find happiness. So Elizabeth told the bandit everything she thought about it. She told Parkas about the carriage with happiness and glory written on the carriage door that she had seen as a child. She told him about King Elemer and his unfortunate fate. She told of her betrothal to the knight Silad, that they loved each other very much and were happy until Parkas, in search of his own happiness, separated them, making them unhappy and making himself happy. Elizabeth told Parkas that you can't build your happiness on someone else's grief. That glory can both delight and disgust, and that only valor breeds good glory. And Elizabeth also said that her feminine heart told her that something had happened to her father, King Shandorm. Perhaps he was very ill, and she could not help him while Parkas kept her in his lodgings. As they talked, Elizabeth did not notice how the day passed. The sun had fallen behind the tops of the pines, and it was getting dark. Parkas had listened to her in silence all this time. He did not utter a single word. And when Elizabeth had finished speaking, Parkas lay down and fell asleep. The next day, Parkas went silently into the forest. He walked through the forest, sat by the stream, climbed a high rock. All the while, Parkas was thinking. For 3 days and 3 nights, Parkas thought and said nothing. On the 4th day, he crept up to the village and overheard the conversations. It turned out that King Shandor was indeed very ill, and no one in the kingdom could help him. Parkas returned to his dwelling. He approached Elizabeth and said,
I have been thinking. I have thought a lot. I know a great deal about herbs. Your father, King Shandor, is ill. I will help him.
Parkas spoke with great pauses in his words.
I will lead you out of the dense forest, and you will guide me stealthily to the king's castle. I know how to help him. I will help him.
His eyes shone with sincere fire and determination. Elizabeth believed the outlaw, so they did. Parkas gathered the herbs and roots he needed. He prepared a potion known only to himself and took it with him. When they came out of the forest, Erzsébet put a big sack on Parkas so that no one would recognize him and led him to the castle. At the entrance, the guards saw the beautiful Erzsébet. They were overjoyed and wanted to tell everyone that the king's daughter had been found and that nothing had happened to her. But the wise Erzsébet told the guards that they should not make any noise because King Shandor was very ill, and his sick heart might not be able to bear the unexpected news. Erzsébet told the guards that she'd found a goblin who knew how to cure the king, but he was so terrible that no one must see him or there would be trouble. Erzsébet took an oath from the guards that they would keep silent. That's how they ended up in the castle. Erzsébet went through the secret corridors of the castle to the king's chambers. The king was madly happy to see his daughter, the beautiful Erzsébet. But he was very ill, and perhaps he did not have long to live. The king's daughter told everything that had happened to her during those days. King Shandor listened to her. He was very surprised at what had happened to her. He was very pleased that his daughter was so clever and could deceive the terrible robber alone. But Erzsébet told her father that it was not a trick, that Parkas wanted to help the king, and he was standing outside the door. Shandor was frightened. He didn't believe the brigand from the dense forest, but he also realized that he had only a few days to live with this disease and no one in the kingdom could help him. So King Shandor agreed. Parkas entered the king's chambers. He was terrible and horrible. But King Shandor managed to overcome his fear. He remembered Parkas's mother, Fruzina. He remembered how she treated the people of the kingdom. And then the king agreed to accept the treatment of the forest robber and former woodcutter. The king's only condition was that Parkas be washed and cleaned up. He was dressed in new clothes and told that he was a healer from another kingdom. For 7 days and 7 nights, Parkas treated the king. No one in the kingdom knew about Erzsébet's return or that the bandit Parkas was in the king's castle. On the 8th day, King Shandor felt that he was completely cured of his illness. He was immensely grateful to Parkas for the cure, but Parkas' past kept the king in suspense. So Parkas asked the king for forgiveness and swore to the king that he would never rob again. And for forgiveness, he promised to provide free firewood for the people of his village and for the king's castle, and to treat the people of the kingdom free of charge for a whole year. And so King Shandor announced his miraculous recovery. He also announced the return of his daughter, the beautiful and wise Erzsébet, alive and unharmed, and about the fact that the terrible forest robber Parkas, Redbeard, is no more, and the inhabitants of the kingdom cannot be afraid and go to the forest. And it was also announced that the king now had a court healer, Parkas, who would treat the kingdom's inhabitants free of charge for a year. The heralds immediately spread the news throughout the kingdom. At first, people were distrustful of Parkas, but seeing how he selflessly works and helps everyone, they forgave him. The glorious knight Szilárd didn't forgive Parkas right away, but he forgave him too. He told Parkas that his sudden attack in the forest had been a great lesson to him, and asked Parkas to teach him the art of wielding an axe. Parkas agreed. More than a year passed. Szilárd and Erzsébet had children, a boy and a girl. Everyone was very happy, and Parkas found his happiness too. He fell in love with Margit, the king's cook. He was happy with her. Parkas was no longer chasing fame. He was happy with Margit, and he was happy to live among the people and help them. But the fame of Parkas as a good and miraculous court healer spread throughout the kingdom and even to neighboring kingdoms. So, not chasing fame, but doing good deeds, the former woodcutter and former robber found his happiness and earned the people's fame. Have you found your happiness and fame? Write your opinion in the comments.
If you liked the video, give it a like.